The biggest plot twist in the movie Gone Girl is when the husband is accused of murdering his wife, and after 27 days of her disappearance, she suddenly reappears in front of him, covered in blood. Although his wife's return could clear Nick of suspicion, the real nightmare has only just begun. A reborn Amy will make his life a living hell. She uses a perfectly crafted lie to explain her disappearance, claiming she was kidnapped by a former high school classmate who had a crush on her. After Nick left that day, the classmate suddenly broke in, struck her on the head, knocking her unconscious, and imprisoned her in a lakeside villa, where she endured multiple instances of inhuman abuse. Last night, during another assault, she used a small knife to cut the man's throat and escaped. The police found the body in the classmate's home, and they also discovered surveillance footage showing Amy trying to escape. Regarding the events in her diary, she claimed they were true. Although Nick made her feel afraid and disappointed, she still deeply loved her husband. Nick, listening outside, felt chills down his spine, but he didn't dare step forward to deny her story. With this flawless tale, Amy once again triumphed. In the eyes of the public, she became utterly perfect, while Nick was seen as a lucky yet pitiable man. But the truth was far from that. It turns out Amy was robbed on her way, with all her money stolen by the thieves. At that moment, she thought of her high school classmate who had a crush on her. After hearing Amy's tearful story, the classmate was overjoyed and took her in without any suspicion, as she willingly embraced him. One day, while watching TV, Amy saw Nick participating in a reality show. On the screen, Nick appeared polished and glamorous, reminding Amy of the man she first met, the one who tried so hard to stand out and grab her attention, showcasing his extraordinary ability to put on a performance. This was the only thing about Nick that genius Amy truly admired. However, over the years of marriage, Nick gradually lost the desire to perform. Now, he spent his time hanging out in bars, playing games, and dating brainless college girls. Nick had become just like an ordinary man, with nothing remarkable about him anymore. This was the real reason for Amy's disappointment. Nick had ruined the game by giving up. If Amy continued to play along with him, she'd be forced into the role of a mundane, unappealing housewife, something she despised. Nick had destroyed more than just their marriage. He had destroyed the extraordinary genius that was Amy. So, she decided to take revenge and bury their marriage with her own hands. She collected urine samples left by a neighbor and faked a medical report. Step 1, to leave behind witnesses. Amy pretended to be pregnant in front of the neighbors and even wrote about her pregnancy in her diary. It turns out that not long ago, Amy had seen her husband on a date with a college girl. To her disgust, he was flirting with the girl in the exact same way he had with her when they first met. Her husband's behavior made Amy feel sick, so she dove into numerous crime books and began secretly planning her revenge. In her diary, she fabricated a story in which her husband had been abusing her for a long time, leading to a miscarriage. Before this, she had already mentioned to the neighbors several times that her husband was abusive. In the diary, Amy wrote about living in constant fear, terrified that one day her husband would kill her. To make everything seem more real, she even went to the black market during the day, pretending to want to buy a gun, leaving a trail for the police to follow. Like 90% of married men, Nick spent his days drinking outside, completely unaware of his wife's actions. He was about to be framed for the murder of his wife. To create a motive for murder, Amy maxed out Nick's credit cards and registered him on multiple gambling websites, fabricating a financial crisis. During one of Nick's gaming sessions, she slipped an insurance policy in front of him, and he unknowingly signed it. If Amy were to die unexpectedly, Nick would be the beneficiary. On their 5th wedding anniversary, after watching Nick leave the house, Amy immediately inserted a syringe into her vein and drew a full bowl of blood. She then sprinkled a few drops on the cabinets and poured the rest on the floor, only to wipe it all away afterward to simulate a murderer cleaning up the crime scene. She also smeared blood on a pre-prepared weapon and burned part of it in the fireplace to destroy evidence. Meanwhile, Nick, completely unaware, was at a bar complaining about his awful marriage, not realizing the disaster about to unfold. Once Amy finished everything, she violently flipped over the coffee table and deliberately left some poorly concealed clues. Then she drove off in a second-hand car she had bought in advance, waiting for the drama she had meticulously planned to unfold. When Nick returned home, he saw the overturned coffee table and couldn't find Amy anywhere. Panicking, he immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, they discovered the bloodstains on the cabinet, just as Amy had intended. Nick was taken to the police station for questioning. It was only then that he suddenly realized, despite being married for 5 years, he knew almost nothing about his wife. He didn't know what Amy did at home, who she spent time with, or even her blood type. At this point, the police hadn't suspected Nick, but as the investigation deepened, more clues started turning against him. In his office, the police found a pair of red panties, which made Nick break into a cold sweat, as it was evidence of his affair with the college girl. If the police discovered this secret, his position would become precarious, so he had no choice but to lie, claiming it was his wife's. However, not long after, the police found evidence that Amy had attempted to buy a gun on the black market. The blood found on the floor also matched Amy's blood type. All signs now pointed to the possibility that Amy had been murdered rather than simply disappearing. Since Amy was a well-known writer, her disappearance quickly garnered public attention. Nick, inexperienced in handling the media, habitually smiled during photos, and when a girl asked to take a picture with him, he even cheerfully said, "Cheese." However, this incident was quickly exposed, and Nick found himself at the center of a media storm. The public was quick to believe that someone who could still smile after his wife disappeared must be involved. Some even speculated that he was the one who killed his wife. Amy, watching her master plan unfold, was pleased. Once the police had gathered all the evidence, she planned to stage her suicide, ensuring her body would be found, and Nick would be sentenced to death. Before this, Amy had already hit herself hard on the head with a hammer. The injury would match perfectly with the weapon she had hidden, making the story more convincing. In response to appeals from Amy's parents, volunteers were organized to search for her, and they even held a vigil in her honor. The unaware public seemed eager to express their sympathy for someone they didn't truly know. Nick went on stage to defend himself, insisting that he had nothing to do with Amy's disappearance and proclaiming that he loved her deeply. But just then, he spotted the college girl standing in the crowd below the stage. To Nick's surprise, a neighbor suddenly rushed out from the crowd and revealed Amy's secret pregnancy. As soon as the neighbor revealed Amy's pregnancy, the crowd erupted in shock. Nick had no choice but to hastily end his speech. In everyone's eyes, it seemed clear that Nick had deliberately concealed his wife's pregnancy, leading them to believe there were even more secrets he was hiding. Although Nick wanted to defend himself, the police had already obtained the medical records from the hospital. Nick finally realized that everything was part of his wife's elaborate plot, but at this point, his only option was to hire a good lawyer. However, what shocked him even more was that the police had found Amy's diary, which detailed everything. Even the police were stunned by the contents. They never expected that the seemingly harmless Nick had such a terrifying side, one that could make his wife so afraid that she considered buying a gun for self-defense. Everything was unfolding just as Amy had anticipated. She had even planned her suicide date, waiting for Nick to be brought to justice. Nick hired an experienced lawyer, realizing that the biggest issue was the overwhelming public support for Amy. He needed to actively seek public backing for himself. The first step was to reveal the real Amy and pull her down from her pedestal as the perfect girl, but he couldn't do it alone. Nick thought of Amy's ex-boyfriend and learned a shocking secret from him. To him, Amy was an extremely controlling person. She had made him try on the same tie over 20 times. Just when he couldn't take it anymore and wanted to break up, he faced Amy's cruel punishment. After an intimate moment, Amy suddenly burst into tears. Just then, the police burst in. They noticed binding marks on Amy's wrists and found that tie by the bedside. Amy had multiple injuries on her lower body, along with her own biological traces left behind. Her ex-boyfriend was facing legal charges for violating a woman's will, which had prevented him from finding a suitable job for 10 years, and no girl wanted to date him. Nick broke into a cold sweat, realizing that this version of events was completely different from what Amy had claimed. Based on the information Nick provided, his lawyer arranged for him to appear on a reality show. If he could expose the truth about Amy on air, they could turn the tide. But just then, the media dropped another bombshell. The college girl suddenly came forward, admitting to her relationship with Nick, and the orchestrators behind it were Amy's parents. In fact, since the day Amy disappeared, they had treated the whole situation as a publicity stunt. They held the rights to Amy's books, and the more impactful this incident was, the more copies they would sell. Amy understood her parents well, and she had known that such a scenario would likely unfold. Now, all the evidence pointed to Nick, and the police arrested him on murder charges. Although he repeatedly defended himself, the police found blood on the weapon that matched Amy's. Fortunately, his lawyer was resourceful enough to secure his temporary bail. When Amy saw Nick again, charming the ignorant public with his smile and putting on a performance filled with faux heartfelt confessions, she felt a spark of recognition, seeing him as an equal partner once more. Yes, she had fallen in love with Nick again. To get back to him, she decided her classmate would become a sacrificial pawn in her disappearance plan. The next day, before her classmate left, Amy deliberately flirted with him. But once he was out the door, she quickly smeared red wine on herself, then positioned herself in front of the camera, loudly crying for help to create the illusion of being kidnapped. Before her classmate returned, she used a rope to create evidence of being bound, then grabbed a wine bottle to inflict injuries that would suggest assault. When her classmate got home, she pretended to throw herself at him. After he left evidence on her, Amy seized the moment and slashed his throat, crafting an impeccable self-defense scenario. She then called the police and, under the cover of night, returned to Nick's side. After dealing with the media outside, they finally began to have an honest conversation. Nick wanted to know what had really happened to Amy. She led him to the bathroom, asking him to strip down to ensure he wasn't wearing any listening devices. Once she was satisfied, Amy revealed everything to Nick. Although he was terrified and wanted to run away, he knew Amy's capabilities all too well. His recent experiences had worn him down, and considering their newfound notoriety, Nick, as a once prominent writer, realized he could still continue his writing career alongside her. So, he reluctantly agreed to play along with Amy's performance. What Nick didn't expect was that Amy had prepared a special gift for him that day. Although he hadn't touched her since her return, she insisted that Nick publicly acknowledge the child as the embodiment of their love during a media appearance. Amy, however, warned Nick that she would give birth to this child and raise them to hate him for the rest of their life. Nick, perhaps having come to an understanding or simply resigned to his fate, accepted his role and agreed to play the loving husband alongside Amy. After all, this was the kind of drama the audience loved most. They didn't care about the truth. They only wanted to see a perfect love story unfold.